The Star Trek franchise spans 12 television series, 13 feature films, and countless novels, comic books, magazines, video games, model toys, and action figures. And I recently started my exploration into the Star Trek franchise, and this is only the beginning, but I've completed the makings of the first 6 movies. And today I will present my rankings of the first 6 Star Trek films. And right off the bat, I'll have to say this will be an interesting list because I don't dislike any of the 6 movies here. In fact, I love every one of these 6 films. In fact, I love this series so much that I rewatch every single one of these movies back to back in order every year, and I've done this since 1995. And there are fantastic films here, there are great films here, and there are good films. Even the last place movie on this list can easily hold its own against so many modern Hollywood hit films. So here are my rankings of the first 6 original series cast Star Trek franchise films. Number 6, Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. Of course, this is no surprise. This film was both a critical and box office dud and almost killed the Star Trek franchise on film. However, you can't deny that this film has a lot of fans. And if you think about it, for this film to unambiguously be the last place holder on the list, that tells you how great this list is. So let's talk about Star Trek V: The Final Frontier because there's a lot to like about this movie. The cast is fantastic and the camaraderie between the crew of the Enterprise has never seemed so effortless. These are actors who have spent much of the last 20 years working with each other, playing characters who spent much of the last 20 years serving together, and they like each other and it shows. You just can't fake that. And for the most part, the humor works. The banter between Bones and Spock telling an appreciative Kirk, "Not in front of the Klingons." And of course the iconic line, "What does God need with a starship?" And 𝐸𝐫𝐷, as portrayed by Lawrence Luckinbill, is a compelling villain. He's charismatic and likable, and you sympathize with his mission and can understand why his men are so willing to follow him. And the musical score by Jerry Goldsmith has been described as the absolute best in the series. Now, on the other hand, there are some problems. You can't mention this movie without talking about the horrendous special effects. 𝐬𝐶 practical effects company responsible for Little Shop of Horrors, was in way over its head with this movie, and it shows. The basic shots of the Enterprise look amateurish, and don't get me started on their final confrontation with God. It makes you wonder what the climactic finale could have been if they decided to use ILM's D-Team instead of trying to save money and going with 𝐸𝐶. And then there are some well-intended but ultimately cringeworthy moments, like when Chekov and Sulu, 2 expert navigators, are lost and trying to convince Uhura that they're stuck in a blizzard. Or when Kirk falls from El Capitan and Spock dives to catch him. Or when Scotty says that he knows the ship like the back of his hand and then hits his head and knocks himself out. And finally, the decision to make 𝐸𝐵𝐷, Spock's half-brother, in order to explain why Spock wouldn't shoot him, seems like a complete mistake. It creates a setup that never pays off. But despite its flaws, this film never strays from its Star Trek roots and fits well into the continuity of the 6 Star Trek films. Ultimately, it's about our crew exploring new planets and meeting new life forms and boldly going where no one has gone before. And that is pure Star Trek. Number 5, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. This movie seems to get better with age. Once dubbed the slow motion picture for its slow, boring pace, it is now generally regarded as an imaginative, cerebral, and thought-provoking entry into the Star Trek canon. The beautiful redesign of the USS Enterprise into something sleek and practically sexy, it still remains my absolute favorite design of my favorite ship. And 𝐵𝐺r is a worthy, awe-inspiring villain that genuinely feels like a threat to Earth. We really wonder how our crew is going to get out of this and save the planet. And the moment where they discover it is the long-lost Voyager 6 probe from Earth comes off like a shocking Twilight Zone twist. And then you get the music by Jerry Goldsmith, which is electrifying and lifts this movie into another level. And you can't deny the incredible special effects. How is it that something made in 1979, 45 years ago, looks so much better than most of Hollywood blockbuster movies today? The glorious introduction of the Enterprise, the interior shots of 𝐵𝐺r, the final merging of Commander Decker with 𝐵𝐺r. It boggles the mind that this was before CGI and was created using simple, practical effects mixed with good old creativity, and that's amazing. However, there are some problems. First, there's no chemistry between the cast. Uhura, Chekov, Sulu, they're woefully underutilized. And there's no familiar banter between the trio of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And Spock seems unusually distant and seems more like a bad parody of Spock rather than Spock. And finally, we get the drab, pastel-colored uniforms, which look like bad 70s loungewear rather than the official clothing of a Federation exploration force. And while this movie is absolutely worth seeing, it is no wonder they decided to go in a completely new direction for the sequel. Now, from here on out, the remaining 4 movies are all fantastic. And I feel ridiculous choosing a 4th film because all 4 of these remaining films deserve a grade of an A or higher. But here I go. Number 4, Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. This breezy and fast-paced, action-packed space opera was the perfect follow-up to Star Trek II. I give this movie a solid grade of an A, and that's how good this movie is. People have claimed that the even-numbered Trek movies are good while the odd-numbered ones are bad, and there may be some truth to that, but Star Trek III clearly breaks that rule because this one is fantastic. I love the theme of this movie, the idea of a group of friends sacrificing everything they have just for the hope of saving the life of one of their own. And I love the fact that every crew member gets a moment to shine. Uhura gets to humble a young cocky officer, Scotty sabotages the 𝐿, and Sulu gets to show off his martial arts skills by manhandling a much larger security guard. It was so fantastic. And Christopher Lloyd is menacing as the Klingon commander, Krug. And we get the introduction of the Klingon Bird of Prey, which will be a seminal ship in the canon of Star Trek. And the moment where the Klingons kill David and we see the devastation on Kirk's face is one of the finest moments of William Shatner's acting career. Some fans criticize this film for ruining the amazing death of Spock in the previous movie, but I don't feel it takes away from that moment at all. And I don't think we could have had the golden age of Star Trek on film without the return of Spock. This movie makes the perfect middle chapter in what has been referred to as the Genesis trilogy of Star Trek II, III, and IV. And Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, as great as it is only number 4 because the other 3 movies are even better. Number 3, Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. This film is effective as a knowing conclusion to the original Star Trek film franchise and is also the swan song for the original series cast. Star Trek V: The Final Frontier was almost the final film in the franchise, and that would not have sat well for most of us. Luckily, they were able to make one more movie, and it's the perfect ending for our beloved crew. In Star Trek VI, we get a Cold War analogy where the Klingon Empire is on the verge of collapse and they reach out to the Federation for help, but many in Starfleet, including Captain Kirk, is not ready to make amends with the Klingons just yet. He's still upset at the murder of his son at the hands of a Klingon commander, and he still harbors prejudice. It's a fantastic allegory for resistance to change and just what it takes to look inward in order to grow and change. David Warner is excellent as Chancellor 𝐿, and Christopher Plummer absolutely steals the show as the Shakespeare-quoting Klingon, General Chang, a bald Klingon with an eye patch bolted to his skull. That's very Klingon. And this film features a breathtaking assassination scene in an anti-gravity environment with floating pools of blood that really took advantage of this emerging technology known as CGI special effects. Ultimately, Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek so that he could explore real-world issues of the time, themes of politics, war, and racism, but hide them in a fantastic science fiction world. And so it's a shame that Roddenberry hated this movie so much, because this film really captures the spirit of why he created Star Trek. It was such a perfect send-off to the cast and crew that gave us so much entertainment over the previous 25 years. The curtain call, the heartfelt goodbye between Captain Kirk and Captain Sulu, the quote from Peter Pan. It doesn't get much better than that. Now we get into the final 2, and it's no surprise that it's down to these 2 films. After all, these 2 films are generally regarded as the best 2 films in the Star Trek original series franchise. Not only are they considered the best in the entire Star Trek film franchise of all 13 films, but these 2 are generally regarded as 2 of the greatest films of all time in the history of cinema, in any franchise of any genre. Now, I love both these films so much that I always have a difficult time choosing which one is better. And on any given day, one seems to win over the other. And I guess the answer is, I like whichever one I'm watching at the time, but I promised a ranking, so I'm going to make a choice right now. And it'll probably alienate a lot of fans with this choice, but here's my controversial choice. Number 2, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. I know, don't hate me. Leave a comment if you agree or disagree. I absolutely love this film, and I give Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan a grade of an A+. I was 13 years old when I saw this movie, and it forever turned me into a die-hard Star Trek fan. Sure, I played Star Trek on the playground as a little kid before this movie and collected a few toys, but it was Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan that made me read the books, made me follow the science fiction magazines, and made me go back and watch as many Star Trek The Original Series TV episodes that I could find back in 1982. After the lukewarm critical reception of Star Trek the Motion Picture, it was this follow-up, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, that breathed new life into the Star Trek franchise and unambiguously resurrected it from the dead. Taking place 15 years after the conclusion of the original series, rather than try to avoid or hide the fact that everyone was older and that the characters would be in a very different place, they cleverly leaned into it and made it the theme of the story. This is a story about aging and desperately trying to hang on to our youths. It's about regret and yearning for the past, and about ghosts from our past returning to destroy and affect our current life. And ultimately, it's about facing our own mortality. From the beginning, the uniforms look better. There's more chemistry between the cast. We actually get the classic and familiar banter between the trio of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And Ricardo Montalban absolutely sizzles as the villainous Khan 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞. And 𝐾𝐨𝐬 𝐿E made a fantastic addition as the new Vulcan, Lieutenant Saavik. And the musical score by then newcomer James Horner is a showstopper. And the moment Spock sacrifices himself to save the Enterprise and the crew still gives me chills. Leonard Nimoy agreed to come back to Star Trek II after being offered a chance to do a great death scene, and boy did he deliver. The moment he and Kirk say goodbye is arguably the greatest death scene ever put on film. This is peak Star Trek. And finally, my number one is Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. I know, I'm probably in the minority of Star Trek fans who choose this over Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, but I just love this movie. I was 16 years old, already a die-hard Star Trek fan because of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and I saw this on opening night with a bunch of my high school buddies, and we all just had such a good time. Many of my friends who were not Star Trek fans became Star Trek fans because of this movie. And then when this movie came out on videotape, I bought it right away, and I would play it almost once daily. While Star Trek II revived the dormant Star Trek franchise, it was Star Trek IV that launched the golden age of Star Trek. Who would have guessed that bringing the Star Trek cast to modern-day California to look for a couple of humpback whales would create one of the most enjoyable 2 hours on film? From the opening moment to the final scene, we get peak Star Trek. Every cast member gets a shining moment in the spotlight. William Shatner has never been more likable. Spock, Vulcan nerve-pinching a rude punk on the bus. Chekhov and Uhura looking for nuclear vessels. Sulu flying a Huey across San Francisco. Scotty and McCoy taking a tour through a plexiglass manufacturer. Dr. McCoy helping an old lady grow a new kidney. Everyone gets to shine like never before. And Catherine Hicks shines as Dr. Jillian Taylor and makes a perfect addition to our familiar cast. And the jokes are genuinely laugh-out-loud funny. Kirk trying to curse and not quite getting the hang of it. Spock trying to curse and completely blowing it. Kirk and Spock arguing about Italian food. Scotty trying to speak to the computer through the mouse. Chekhov being interrogated on the Enterprise. And yet, despite all this, the movie never feels cringy or out of place in the Star Trek universe. The probe is a genuine threat to Earth and the Federation, and our crew, on their way to their own court-martial, still decides to save the Earth one more time. They successfully bring back the whales and save civilization. So our heroes get cleared of all charges. Spock and his father Sarek share an emotional moment as father and son. And at the end, we get Admiral Kirk reduced in rank back to Captain Kirk, being given command of a newly built Enterprise. Everything comes back full circle after a glorious, most perfect 2 hours of cinema. This film would indeed launch the new golden age of Star Trek, which would last for the next 20 years. A year later, we would get the Star Trek Next Generation series. We get 2 more films, The Final Frontier and The Undiscovered Country. We would get 2 more series, Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager. 4 more Star Trek The Next Generation movies, and a 5th series, Star Trek Enterprise. We would get countless books, countless video games, toys, and thousands of hours of top-rank entertainment. And that's why I rank this movie number 1. And that's my controversial ranking of the first 6 Star Trek movies. Please let me know if you agree or disagree. Go to the comments and give me your rankings of the first 6 Star Trek movies. And that ends this video. Thank you so much for watching.